This week's quick tip is for those of you out there who use a dedicated buffing machine to buff up the high gloss finish on your guitars. Now, if you're like me, you probably use a soft flannel type buffing wheel to buff up the finishes, regardless of the compound you're using. These are really gentle on delicate finishes, and they work pretty well. However, over the years as I've been buffing, I've always wondered, what if I were to switch to a harder, stiffer wheel? And that's what I've been doing lately. And my buffing process consists of 4 phases. I have a coarse buffing phase where I use brown Menzerna stick compound, and I use that to bring up the initial shine and to take out the remaining sanding scratches left over from the leveling process. Then I go to a phase 2, which I use a yellow Menzerna fine polishing stick compound, and that helps take that polish to a little bit higher level. Then to finish, I'll take off a set of the wheels and I'll put on my soft flannel buffing wheel, and I'll polish with a tan Menzerna extra fine stick compound, and that brings up the highest shine. And then the 4th stage involves using a swirl mover with a foam pad on my drill press, and I'll show that in just a second. But my tip is to consider using a harder, stiffer wheel for the first phase and the second phase. And the reason for that is when we level sand our guitars prior to buffing, we typically will work up through a range of sanding grits. Typically, I start out at about 800, and then you can work up, if you're dry sanding using Mirka Abralon pads, which I've recommended in the past, you can go as high as 4,000 grit, and then you're ready to buff. If you're wet sanding, you can, using micro mesh pads, go up as high as 12,000 grit. But of course, the more grits you use, the longer it takes and the more work it is, and the greater the potential for sanding through on edges and that sort of thing. So in my quest to try to simplify that process and to speed it up, I've decided to stop my level sanding at 1,500 grit, and then I'm using this stiffer, harder wheel with the coarse compound, and then I use the same type of wheel with the fine compound. And that allows me to stop the sanding, like I said, at 1,500 grit, which speeds up the whole process. So I get the initial shine here. I refine it a little bit with this wheel and the fine compound. And then I'll go to the really soft flannel wheel for the final stage of that buffing using that extra fine compound. Now, I've included links for the specific wheels that I'm using down in the description below, so you can go check those out. They're very affordably priced, so I encourage you to take a look at it. And now let me just give you a quick explanation of that 4th phase of swirl removal. The 4th and final phase of my buffing process involves scratch and swirl removal. And the way I do it is I just use a silicone-free scratch and swirl remover, which it's a liquid that I apply over the surface with a clean cloth, kind of like if you're buffing a car. But I apply it first, and then I bring it over to my drill press. And what I've done is I've got this is a fine foam polishing pad. And these are used a lot in buffing out car finishes. And they do it normally with those hand buffers, which you can use for buffing out or scratch removal on your guitar bodies, but it's just kind of hard to handle the body and the buffing machine at the same time. So I use my drill press, and it's Velcro attached with Velcro. And so once I've applied the swirl remover to the entire surface, I just come over to the drill press, and I have this set so that the pad is spinning at about 620 RPM. And I'll buff out that surface, and what that does is it just takes out those last little swirl and scratches these super fine scratches, and the result is a totally scratch-free, super high gloss finish. And you can't see scratches or swirl in pretty much any lighting situation. So it really puts that last little level of professional results on your high gloss finish. So that's basically this week's tip. I encourage you to try the harder, stiffer buffing wheels, and if you do, let me know what you think. I don't know anyone else out there who's doing that, but I'd always wondered if that was something that I could do to decrease the amount of level sanding and polishing sanding that I was doing leading up to the point of buffing out my guitars. And so far it seems to be working really well. So give that a shot. And until next time, we'll see you soon.